Hi and welcome. Thank you for being here, spending part of your lunch break, depending on which time zone you're in, with us with this particular wonderful opportunity for building specialists. So why don't you type into the chat box where you're dialing in from and which building specialist profile you are interested in. So put that into the chat box, making sure everybody is in sync, everybody's properly connected. And I'm waiting for a confirmation from my team that everything works fine in terms of audio and video. Wow, even from New York City, that's wonderful. That's pretty far away. So good morning to you. And I can see from so many wonderful places, from Italy, from Brussels, from Ispra, from Kenya. Oh my God, this is extremely geographically and domain-wise diverse. Greece, Luxembourg, Italy. That's amazing. Thank you so much for being here. So in respect of everyone's time and the many things that I want to share with you in the context of this particular competition, thank you for being here. If there's any problem with the audio or the video, please just reload the page or open a new browser if you have that on your device. And if everything fails, then note the meeting ID number as shown on the screen, and then you can connect from your tablet or from your phone. But with that, normally none of this happens, and it's perfectly fine to just refresh the page, and that should fix 99% of the audio or video problems. So with that, let's get started. And you might know my work. I've been dealing with European careers, with EPSO exams for a long time, 15, 20 years by now. And I'm the author of the Ultimate EU Test Book, which is a preparation book for these competitions. And then with EU Training, I am a partner and co-founder of it. So with that, this will be available. Slides will be available after the session, both the recording and the slides themselves. And we often do a transcript, but all the key information is there. But you certainly have the benefit of asking questions, which I will answer to the best of my abilities, depending on how many of those come in, and if I can immediately answer it, or perhaps we find a way to follow up or send you the responses in some shape or form. So with that, about EU Training, a couple of words about our company, those of you who may not be familiar with the services that we offer. So basically, we have really a large number of users. Now, certainly many of them are happily EU officials or working as EU officials. And happily I say, because that means they are not competitors of yours and they are not applicants for the same competition. We have a very active and robust community on Facebook and an increasing number of followers on LinkedIn. So I encourage you to sign up for those platforms if you are present there. But certainly we have newsletters, we have different communication channels, and we have webinars like the one you are participating in right now, or perhaps you might be watching this recording later on. We also do other formats, which often takes the form of an Ask Me Anything session. So there, once a month, we have with Luke, my dear colleague and former EPSO official, former EU official, we sit down and we ask you literally any question that comes in about EUcareers and EPSO exams. And then on our interface, on our platform, we have tens of thousands of practice questions, and not just questions, but webinars, methodology, resources. A large number of these resources are free, so you can check those out there, download or watch them in due course. And not only that, with the webinars and the webcast, but we have trainers, coaches who can assist you in your preparation. So let's actually get to today's competition, which is building specialists. So first and foremost, it's an AD7 competition. So those of you who are more familiar with the EU system would know that this typically requires 6 years of work experience at least to be an AD7. So those who enter on AD5 level would need to spend at least 6 years to get to this point. Now, if you pass this competition, you are immediately recruited on AD7 level. But having said that, just to be clear, selection and recruitment are somewhat separate things. They are deeply connected, but they are separate phases in the process. And what we are focusing on today is the selection part. So EPSO is the European Personnel Selection Office, and we are looking at the particular exams and the particular steps and best practices and know-how that you need to follow to be eventually placed on what they call a reserve list. And then the actual recruitment happens as a separate step after you are on the reserve list. So let's walk through and go through the different details when it comes to this particular competition. And the interesting thing is that EPSO has had quite a few challenges in their operations and in running the exams, and not so much themselves, but their test provider, the subcontractor that was running these particular competitions, because they are computer-based. Now, after those fiascos behind us, they selected a new test provider, a Luxembourg-based company, which is called Open Assessment Technologies, OAT. And since June 2025, they have been officially the contracting partner of EPSO, but they have not run any competition yet. So that is very new in terms of organization, and they will start running new competitions hopefully fairly soon. But it seems that this particular exam is the first one where this company will be the technical delivery partner of EPSO. And I say that because this could mean certain practical changes. It might have certain practical impact on the way the competitions are done and run. The test dates will be communicated later. That's normal. But we need to see, for instance, the testing interface. Is it going to slightly change when it comes to, say, a calculator for the numerical reasoning? Where will it be placed? How is it going to pop up? What sort of operations can you do on it? What about the written test? Can you type in a certain way, or is it a split screen or some other interface? These might seem nuances, but as we get to explaining those particular parts of the competition, I'll come back to these, because these can have an impact on your exam performance and therefore your preparation. Having said that, the good news is that this provider is in place, and hopefully they are professional and robust enough not to have any particular issues. Another question is whether this will impact whether all components of this particular competition will happen on the same day, or will that be segmented into 2 days or multiple days, and that is still an unknown thing. Now, one extremely important consideration is that the equality of chances for all candidates. So if some candidates take the exam earlier, others take later, information can spread. Other candidates may have certain advantages that the first batch, the first round, did not have. So that doesn't seem likely from a legal, ethical perspective. But again, we need to see those variables, how that's going to play out. So talking about very specifically of this competition for building management, as you certainly know, most of you would be well aware that there are 4 profiles that are essentially advertised. There's a project management in the building sector, there's architecture and project management, there's the electrical engineering and project management, there's the heating, ventilation, AC, so HVAC, I think that's the right pronunciation, engineering and project management. These are the 4 profiles with a certain number of places on the reserve list, and in total 411, and you must choose only one out of this 4. So that decision is obviously partly informed by your background. Where do you qualify? Which one do you qualify for? And it's also informed by your, say, statistical probabilistic analysis. The first one obviously is the most constraining, because if you have that particular background, engineering degree, work experience, and all the rest that we're going to look at in a moment, if you have that flexibility / luxury to apply, to qualify for multiple profiles, then comes the next one, should you? And which one should you choose? Now, one consideration, this is not unheard of that a competition has multiple profiles. This happens often in different contexts, completely unrelated to this field. It could happen in other areas, in other policy domains. And then comes always the question, what should I consider when making such a decision, which profile to go for if I qualify for more than one? Certainly, you look at the number of places on the reserve list, but in and by itself, it's insufficient to make such a decision, because if we're looking at your chances, the probability of you succeeding, obviously you need to know the other side of that fraction, which is how many candidates will apply. Because you could have 153 places, but if you have 3,000 applicants versus 75 places, but only 500 applicants, obviously the chances are far better in the second case. So that is a consideration, which is not something you will know only after the deadline has passed, only after the application deadline is over. That is when EPSO typically communicates how many applicants there are for each of the profiles. So that is something you need to anticipate or take a certain guesstimate. If your primary consideration is maximizing your chances. Now, if you say, well, yes, of course I want to maximize my chances, but I really want to work in that particular profile or another profile. In that case, you will not do that kind of chance estimation. You'll just go for one or the other, which is really, you are an electrical engineer, and that is exactly what you want to do. So that's the profile you would go for. So again, I'm just flagging these and mentioning these considerations because I'm sure many of you have that sort of dilemma and thinking of how should I decide which area, which profile should I be looking at? And these are the things that you might want to factor in. Now, where will you work? Well, the place of work largely depends on where the given institution, EU institution that eventually employs you is located. And for the large part, it's likely the European Commission is going to be the most likely employer that's going to hire you in the end. And the Commission is present in Luxembourg, present in Brussels, but also present as Commission representations in all EU member states. And there are, well, it's no longer Commission, but the External Action Service delegations around the world. But the most likely place of work is Brussels or Luxembourg, again, depending on which EU institution you eventually end up working for. Now, another aspect is what will you do? And if I were very cynical, I would say you'll be deleting emails. But the job obviously is a very practical one. It's a somewhat sort of an outlier in the great pool of EU jobs, because you're dealing with building management and something highly practical, highly tangible, and highly concrete, as opposed to sometimes somewhat abstract and somewhat hard to connect to everyday experiences, policy jobs. Because if you're dealing with, say, agriculture policy, yeah, sure, agriculture is an important part of our lives, but on a policy level, it may be somewhat distanced and somewhat far away from the everyday realities. Whereas in this particular case, this is something very concrete. So you're contributing, developing to the institution's sustainability policies, but also implementing environmental management systems, facility management, managing teams, working with external consultants, looking at the institution's policies for building management. So there are so many aspects and so many sides to this particular job that this makes it perhaps a more enjoyable and a more fulfilling EU role, because you are after all dealing with something very concrete, very tangible, while working for the European Union institutions. Now, what are the criteria that you need to fulfill? There are some very straightforward and recurring criteria, the basic general requirements that are always the minimum requirements to apply for an EU job and to get an EU job. You need to be a European Union citizen. You need to have fulfilled military service requirements, if that's a requirement in your particular country of your citizenship, and then meet the character requirements. And that often means that if you're dealing with sensitive matters or security related, even physical security related, then you might be required also to get a security clearance or some other vetting process. So these are the say generic points, and then the specific requirements. Specific requirements are about what exactly you need for this particular competition, and that generally relates 2 languages, and also to the qualifications and the work experience. So let's look at these one by one, and let's take a look at the language rules. Another common recurring way of EU approach is having 2 languages. So you need to have two particular language, speak, write, be comfortable in 2 languages, not to the same degree, because there's language 1, which is essentially your mother tongue. So minimum C1 level, as they call it. It's essentially any of the EU's 24 official languages, and that is independent of your citizenship and independent of where you live. I, as Hungarian, I could speak or I could choose French if I consider myself to be so fluent in that particular language. I could choose Estonian if I spoke Estonian, which I don't. So it's entirely disjointed from the country of your citizenship. You can choose any language you wish, as long as it's an official EU language. Say, if you speak fluent Russian, it's not an official EU language, so that is not something you could choose. Language 2, on the other hand, is any of the remaining 23. And by that token, you can really choose Czech or Slovak. You can choose Finnish and Swedish. You can choose, again, you get the point, Spanish or Portuguese. So even if it's 2 languages, neighboring countries, or somewhat close, linguistically closely related languages, you can choose those. And you will have noticed English, French, Italian, Spanish, German. So the largest languages are not prioritized in any way. This becomes important, obviously, at the point of hiring, at the point of recruitment. Truth be told, English and or French tend to be extremely important at the point of hiring, and the EU institutions have those as working languages, English, French, and German, but practically English and to a large degree French, German much less degree. And that is an important aspect of you getting hired. But like I said in my introduction, selection and recruitment are separate. And we are looking at the selection process, and in the selection process or procedure, you need to choose one of the 24 languages and the 23 remaining languages. And those can be really anything as long as they are EU official languages, completely not related to the country of your citizenship. Now, by the way, English can obviously be chosen. It's the official language of Ireland and widely spoken in Malta, and obviously perhaps one of the most widely spoken second language around the EU, but it's an official language, and that is something you can choose. So that was the languages. How about qualifications? Now, qualifications, please double check it, triple check it, think about it, read up on it. What I'm saying here is, to the very best of our abilities, we went to great length to check and verify and cross-check. We may still have maybe a number wrong, or I might explain it in a way that might give cause or give rise to some confusion. So the official source is always the notice of competition. So be sure that you look at the notice of competition, especially for such a consequential decision as to evaluate whether you qualify or you do not qualify for a certain competition. Now, just to give you the kind of the top level, it's typically some mix of how many years of studies you did and how many years of work experience you have. And the shorter your studies were, the more work experience you are required to have. So that's why you have a 3-year diploma in architecture engineering with building sector focus. Then you need 7 years of professional experience. And if it's 4, then you need 6. And if it's 5, then you need 5. So that is kind of the baseline. And then there's a fourth scenario where only for fields 1 and 2, so only for those particular fields, you need to have, or you could have, this is also an option for you, 6 years of studies and 4 years of experience. So that's also an option, but only for fields 1 and 2, not 3 and 4, not the HVAC and the other field. So that is a combination, and you need to count it. You need to see it. Now, the work experience, it's typically counted after your studies. So summer internship, even if it was paid, is typically not counted, but only after you received your degree. Now, that could be tricky if you got your degree later. So there could be individual scenarios or individual situations that need closer inspection and need to see more closely. And I see from the corner of my eyes, Francesca is asking about PhD. PhD, it also depends whether it was purely studying or it had, say, teaching parts in it. That is sometimes a consideration, that basically you were working as a PhD student or similar. That would typically be counted. But if it was not, then it's under a separate calculation header. So the qualifications, basically the professional, to answer part of those questions that are coming in, so the professional experience is relevant if it satisfies the nature and scope of the experience in the notice of competition. So if you were a Spanish teacher in Cambodia, you will likely, that particular part of your life would not be considered as a relevant professional experience. Certainly you were working and you did important stuff, but it's not relevant to the nature and scope of the tasks that are listed in the notice of competition. And also the education and qualifications described clearly as specified in notice of competition. So certainly, again, it has to be relevant to the profile. It cannot be something completely different. So before I move on, I will pause for a second, just put this slide up, why it's a great opportunity, because I see that there are many questions coming in. So let me try to answer some of them. So here's one. George is asking, so is it legal to upload all the details of our previous projects as proof, especially from private sector? It's very limiting the information we can share. Now, it depends on, I haven't checked the form where you need to upload it, or you need to upload it as a separate document. And obviously, we are in Europe, we are in the EU, GDPR, data protection is a big thing. So you will not be requested to upload information that is sensitive or you're not allowed, say legally allowed to disclose. Or they might say if they absolutely need that for whatever internal reasons, then they give you the relevant reassurances that this will be treated confidentially. So you need to see exactly how important those details are to the information you're providing. But I would probably say if something needs to be blacked out or redacted, then redact it. And if they need more details and they give you the reassurances, then you can provide that. Stefan is asking, if I have a 5-year degree in electronic engineering, can I still apply for this competition? I would not like to address that head on, because now a quick look and without knowing further context, whether you qualify or not, my hunch is possibly. But again, electronic engineering, you need to see how that relates to the task and the different profiles. Chances are you would fit into one of the profiles, perhaps with the project management or other aspects. But I would not like to say anything pro or against for this, whether you qualify or not. Sometimes you need to hand in the application and see whether they accepted your profile. Sometimes it's possible to send in a question like this to the selection board, and they would answer, though they don't always they aren't always willing to do that without you sending in a formal application. And then in the course of the overall procedure, they would examine it and make a decision, and not necessarily just through a contact email to say, yeah, you qualify, and then they examine your dossier in greater detail and they realize that you don't. So again, you need to see exactly the kind of subjects you studied and the general curriculum you had, how that compares to the criteria that I briefly outlined a moment ago and the one written in the notice of competition. And then here, Desponi is asking, can you apply for 2 profiles? The answer is no. Francesca, PhD, I mentioned that earlier. And maybe one more question before we move on. And I know there are others, which I'll try to come back to towards the end. Marta is asking, if you have a degree from the American university, does it cover the language rule? No. So the language part, there's no certificate that you can hand in to prove your linguistic competences. It's all part of the exam that you need to sit that exam and succeed and pass the exam. there's no DALF or DELE or Cambridge or any other language certificate that you may have that you can hand in and not to have the language part. Essentially, the language choice is a choice. So you choose a language 1, you choose a language 2, and that determines in which language you need to take the particular exams, which I'm going to discuss in a moment. So that's just a linguistic choice. It's not a language test. It's using the language, and you get the tests in that particular language of your choice, and you need to sit the exam in language 1 or language 2, depending on which component we're talking about. But that's it. It's not that you are given a linguistic grammar or any other test whatsoever. Okay, maybe one more. And Clary is asking, would it be possible to receive an estimate when the test will take place? I wish I knew, because now there are so many moving parts given the new provider, and EPSO themselves, they're saying, well, we don't really yet have any confirmation what the exams will be given the onboarding of the new test provider. I don't think it's going to take place before November, December, perhaps not even this year, perhaps January, February seems more realistic. You will definitely know at least a month in advance, probably more, but at least 1 month in advance. So there is time, not unlimited, but it's not yet known because this new system is being put in place as we speak. And like I said, it's probably going to take several weeks. Now, there's another big competition that everybody's expecting that's completely independent from this one. It's for generalists, so not specialists like building specialists. And if that one happens, it takes place before, then that might push back the actual running of this competition by a couple of weeks or months. Okay, so let's move on. And I know there are many other questions, but I'll try to come back to those in due course. Why this is a great opportunity? Many of you need no convincing because you're familiar with the benefits. Others may be less so. So just to quickly recap that as an EU official, especially at AD7 level, well, at any level, you get access to health insurance and European schools if you have children, and pretty good salaries. And the AD7 comes into play at this point because that determines your salary to a large degree. There is a small variation depending on how many years of work experience you have. So it's a small adjustment, but the kind of the headline amount is the one I'm going to show you on screen. We have on the EU training website a salary calculator, because there you can input if you have children or where you're relocating from, and a couple of other variables that have an impact on your salary. But just to give you an idea, the simulation we did saying, are you eligible for expat allowance, meaning you are not recruited from Brussels and it's somewhat from its vicinity, but you need to actually move to Brussels if that's going to be the place of work. 87 is the grade, which is given. Salary step, we came with the assumption of 1, and say you have 2 kids. So the net salary is in the range of 8,380 euros, which is a pretty attractive salary for the most part. Obviously, it largely depends on what country or part of Europe or work you might be coming from, but still, this is a pretty competitive salary at that level. So let's look at the different competition phases. I see from Vinesh what salary step means. So like I said, it's a tiny, it's a relatively minor adjustment based on how many years of work experience you have. And it could mean a couple €100, give or take, around that main number that I mentioned. EPSO competition phases. So what are the different exam steps or components that you need to pass in order to be placed on the reserve list and then eventually land a job? So those steps are the following. Essentially, there's an application process or application step where you need to fill in your profile. You need to complete the online application form. The most consequential part are the EPSO tests. EPSO, just for you, those of you who are really new to this, European Personnel Selection Office. So EPSO tests, and we'll look at those, what they are in a moment. Then there is the eligibility check, which which is not something you do, it's something they do, they being the selection board. They will look through the documents and your degrees and declarations and all the rest to check that you truly, genuinely qualify for this particular competition. So this is where the person who was asking about the electrical engineering degree, that might be the point where they check their degrees, diplomas, and qualifications and say, yeah, you are eligible. But you will need to have passed the tests first for them to check your documents and submissions and say you are eligible. So the first step is very straightforward, easy, not particularly rocket science, that you go into the login page and into the single candidate portal, and you fill in everything, creating the account, you put in all the information, choosing languages. And again, you see it's like the email language. That's not the exam language. So it could be English, perhaps just for simplicity. It could be any other. And you fill in all the forms and the different things. Now, they created a single candidate portal. So if you decide to apply for another competition at some point, because you qualify for that, because you're interested in that, you can definitely do it. You have that particular profile, and through that, you can apply for multiple. It's not like for every competition you need to fill in different stuff. This is your single point of contact, so to say. And you need to upload valid, ID card, passport, supporting documents, and all the rest. But typically, for one particular competition, the supporting documents can and need, but essentially they can be uploaded later. And that is something we're going to look at. So if you are perhaps finishing certain studies, or you may not have the work experience yet, but you will have in a couple of months, then you can still do it. So it's not that just because the exam application deadline is going to pass on the 17th of October, so pretty much 1 month from now at the time of recording, that you need to have the required amount of studies and or work experience at that point in time, because the supporting documents need to be uploaded before the 12th of February next year. So that's good news because of the reasons I stated, because that gives you more flexibility and higher chances to qualify if those few months actually may cut you out or cut you off from applying or qualifying for this particular competition. Now, the tests, all candidates whose application have been submitted on time and properly sent in are going to be invited to the tests. And that's good news. So being invited to the test is not yet cause for you to put the champagne into the fridge. That will happen when you learn that you passed a certain part of it or a certain test, because at this point, everyone is invited as long as you sent it everything on time, you didn't leave it to the last moment, the server didn't have any hiccups in the last moment because so many candidates left it to the last 24 hours. Be sure you fill it out, send it in, and off you go. Now, the real challenge, the real, how do the Americans say it? When the rubber hits the road, that happens when the tests are conducted. You will know, like I said, at least a month, usually 6 weeks in advance when the exam date is going to be. And it's done remotely. So wherever you are in the world, as long as you have a suitable computer to take the tests with and a proper space, so to say, which where you don't have, let's say, like it's compliant. And that's another thing that we will see with the new test provider, how they do, say, the background, not a background check, the environment check, to be sure that you're not cheating, that you don't have a large display somewhere or a friend with ChatGPT and immediately gives you the answers. Now, obviously, these are immediate causes for disqualifications, but given the fact that it's remotely administered, what they used to do is, like, you have to have a camera and you need to show around the room that nobody is there, and you don't have any displays or whatever other suspicious object. And there were some issues around data privacy and showing your home if you were taking the exam in your home. So again, there are some delicate issues around those things. But the bottom line is that it's remotely conducted, and it's on a computer where you need to be able to install a software. So you need to be able to install the testing software, which causes or has created some challenges for some candidates, because if you have a computer from your employer and the administrator rights to the computer are limited, so you cannot install external software, that can preclude you from using that computer for the exam. Then you need to look for a computer, ask for a friend or other to get a computer to be able to install the right software. As a side note, so I'm sitting here in our studio and in our center at Ambiorix in Brussels, close to the Commission building. So here we rent our space for EPSO competitions. So we have compliant computers, high-speed secure internet, and silent spaces. So if you are in search of a space where you want to take the exam at, then ours is available. We have 4 slots. Sometimes we can create a 5th, but typically 4 slots. So it's not like we have unlimited opportunities here, but for the exam date, this is a possibility. But again, you could be sitting literally anywhere in the world, as long as you have the right software and then a dedicated attention to the exam. You will be able to sit it. And then if you don't complete any tests specified, then you're out from the competition. Now, what are those particular tests? Many of you would be intimately familiar with this. Others may be completely new to this. But just to give a quick rundown, a quick summary, there are what are called reasoning skills. These are abstract, verbal, numerical reasoning skills, sometimes referred to as psychometric tests. The second one are field-related multiple choice quiz. So this is related to one of the 4 fields that you applied for. And these are knowledge-driven questions that test your knowledge and understanding of that particular field that you had chosen. And then there's a written test, which is broadly related to the fields of the competition, but it doesn't test your domain-related knowledge. What it tests is your communication skills. So communication skills, so you need to write about a topic or process a background document and write a briefing or some note based on a background document, which is typically communicated to you 10 days or 2 weeks before the exam. So that's a background document you will get, like I said, 10 days, 2 weeks before the exam. You can read it, you can process it, you can analyze it. And the same document is given to you at the exam, and then you are given an assignment to write a note, a briefing, or something similar. You type it, and what it does, it doesn't test your understanding and knowledge of your particular field. It evaluates your communication skills. Again, in that particular context, but its focus is communication skills. So a quick look at those. You have the verbal abstract numerical reasoning, part 1. The good news is it's essentially pass or fail, and it doesn't count towards your final score. So you need to be good enough to pass those particular elements. But if you pass with maximal score or barely, but you pass, it's just as good. And the verbal reasoning, we have thousands and thousands of verbal reasoning tests on our website on EU Training in 24 languages of the EU, from Slovak to Romanian to Greek to Italian to what have you. You can choose those. And the way they work, you have 20 questions and 35 minutes to answer those. And there's a text passage, there's a question, statements, and correct answer. It's not a reading comprehension test. It's more of a logic test where you need to find the one correct answer in a logical sense. Obviously, linguistically, you need to understand it, but it doesn't measure your linguistic abilities. It's a reasoning test. Similarly to the numerical reasoning, where you have numbers, you have a chart, there's a data interpretation, reasoning estimation. You do get a calculator on screen. I say that with a tiny caveat that with the new test provider, I don't think it's going to change. But again, we cannot fully exclude that there's going to be a calculator. But I'd say 98% certain that there's going to be a calculator available on screen. So that's good news, but it takes time to use that calculator on screen. And that is why quick calculations, understanding what operations you need to do, and sometimes just an estimation is sufficient for the sake of time. And then everyone's favorite, I'm a bit cynical here, because this is typically the most hated, dreaded exercise, the abstract reasoning, 10 questions in 10 minutes. And again, not so much for its inherent difficulty, but the time pressure, because finding the next in the sequence of these strange abstract paintings and figures is not so obvious. And doing it one question per minute is what makes it so difficult. So the pass mark, like I said, it's pass or fail. The verbal reasoning is basically 50%, and then the combined scoring of the numerical and abstract is 50%. So if you get 0 point on abstract and maximum score on numerical, you get 10 points, you're good. So you pass. Now, certainly you don't want to take risks, you don't want to take chances, so you want to maximize it, but this is as only required that you pass it. The real tricky part perhaps comes afterwards, where you have the field-related multiple choice questions. So this is where your subject matter expertise is really what matters and your understanding of it. Now, one important point there, it's all coming from a European Union angle. So it's partly what you know about a particular field, whether that's project management in the building sector, environmental sustainability, compliance, and everything that relates to this particular field. But the main issue is that this is a European Union exam after all. So I would encourage you to look at the Commission's OIB, which is the Office of Infrastructure and Buildings. Look at their website, look at their annual report, look at their priorities, look at their whatever information they put out there. Consider those as part of your preparation, because that will have a certain impact, or perhaps outright questions coming from those related to the competition. So it's not just purely your university textbooks and the knowledge in that particular field, but again, framed in a European Union context, which you would want to factor in. Now here, the ranking is actually based on the scores of this particular competition or this particular component, and this is done in language 2. So the abstract verbal numerical reasoning in language 1. So you pick a language there that you are most comfortable receiving information in, processing information in. Language 2 should be a language of your choice in which you can express yourself at greatest ease. Now here, there's no real expression because you are looking at multiple choice quiz, but as we'll see, the next one, the written test, there you actively need to write in that particular language. And also terminology. I mean, in this particular field, like in any other, the abbreviations, the jargon of your sector and your industry is extremely important. So you need to be familiar with the terms and expressions in this particular language. So that can have an impact on your choice of languages. So there's a pass mark, but it's basically unimportant because there's a ranking. So almost certainly everyone will pass the pass mark, but the ranking is what matters here. How many correct answers you've given out of the 30 questions, that has a massive impact on your ranking. And then there's the written test, like I said, 40 minutes. This is a pass mark, 5 out of 10. And like I said, not a language test. And this is really focusing on the written communication in that particular area, framed in the context of your competition, of your profile, but it's not testing your knowledge of that particular profile. And beyond this point, like I said, it could be on a single day, as it happened so far. So every candidate was sitting the exam on the same day, but it might change. Whether one element is still being taken by all candidates at the same time or same day, and then another one on another day, we need to see how they organize themselves. But given that it's remote testing with the digital organization, there are some considerations to bear in mind. And that's it. So essentially, beyond this point, there is not much more for you to do, because the eligibility check is carried out by the selection board, depending on the scores, depending on your results, and depending on all those variables. And then hopefully, if everything goes well, then those who reach the right scores and the highest ranking and all the rest, they will send you a message that, hey, you are on the reserve list. It's not a ranked reserve list, so you are not ranked according to the scores that you obtained at the exam. Once you're on the reserve list, you're halfway in. You're not fully in, but you're halfway in because you are notified in your EPSO account. That's when you can put the champagne into the fridge. That's a great achievement. And you actually open that when you are hired, because the hiring comes afterwards by the department, directorate general, unit that has a vacancy, and they might subject you to an interview. But again, it's to determine from 2 or 3 or a very limited number of candidates who are already on the reserve list that they call in and say, okay, let's see who's the best fit for this particular job. So this is the complete rundown of how the scoring happens. And but again, it doesn't really have an impact on your preparation, because you want to do your best at every stage, but specifically focusing on the abstract verbal numerical, the field-related test, and the written test. And good news is at EU Training, we have preparation for everything, not yet for the field-related multiple choice quiz. And we are looking into this, and we are consulting expert, and we don't yet know when we can make that available. So we're working on that, hopefully soon. But again, that one I cannot promise yet. But for the abstract verbal numerical, definitely. For the written test, definitely. And for the field-related, we are looking into it as we speak. Very quickly, how to get the job. And I'm going to actually, let me pick a couple of questions. I see many are coming in. Notice of competition. Where can we find notice of competition? That is openly available on the EUcareers website, but perhaps my colleagues can put there the link. But in the follow-up, we can send you also the link. It's a publicly readily available document as an EU official document. Carlota is asking, reserve list. Once on the reserve list, can you apply for other EU Commission positions like as policy officer? Well, legally speaking, you can. Practically speaking, they might not take you, because there's a reason why this particular competition was advertised or announced, because it's based on the requirements, based on the needs of the different DGs or services who need a certain number of experts in this particular field. So others, completely unrelated vacancies, would not want to go against their colleagues in other departments who need your expertise, because there's a very good reason why they advertise this particular competition and not others. So not at first, I would say. If 6 months, 1 year, certain amount of time passes and you still weren't hired and there is a specific vacancy where your expertise could be used, it could happen that they eventually extend an offer to you. One more, and then we go back to the last bit. Claude is asking, Claude, EU Training contra new test provider. Do your platform EU Training allows us to practice in the same format that a new EPSO contractor will present? So we don't yet know how exactly their test interface is going to look like. I would hazard a guess they themselves don't know. They certainly have their own systems, and they have their everything that they have been giving to their various clients, they being the new test provider, but there might be some nuances that are being tweaked. There are specific requests that may come from EPSO and say, well, do like this, do like that. Obviously, accessibility is a big thing, and a host of things on the user interface needs to be compatible with a range of machines and screens, etc. So there might be tweaking it as we speak. I'm pretty sure that they will be transparent about it. They will communicate about the interface, what it looks like, and immediately our priority will be to adapt our interface to that one. Now, again, 95% our current interface would help you in the preparation. But of course, we want to be as helpful to you as possible to adapt it, and that you are not surprised when you actually get to the exam, and you will be able to take tests and exams in an almost fully identical interface as to the one that you practice with. Okay, I see there are a couple points there. We're going to come back to in a moment. If we could switch to the slides, and just to say a few words about how to get the job. And of course, there's a lot to say there. We have many resources, methodology webinars, coaches, trainers, free support. Always feel free to send us a message. We would take it very seriously, help candidates, guide you to the resources or to the information that can help you. a couple of pointers there. So practice, we'd say 10, 12 weeks, but again, largely depends on your baseline. Where are you now? If you don't know what numerical reasoning is, you might need more than a couple of weeks. If you have applied for other competitions, you practice that, you probably need less. So really, the most important is the consistency and to prepare for a certain number of hours per week. Give it a certain schedule, certain regimen that really can help you with regular practice, almost like a sport or learning a language or dancing tango, what have you. It's just the regularity of it is really important. And the most important is really that there is a methodology. There is a system to it. There are some best practices for verbal reasoning, reading the question, then answering the answer, getting the answer options, or the other way around. How do you focus on speed reading? There are lots of techniques and things to say about it. And we have ebooks about it. We have webinars, free and paid, all sorts. And that is something that can benefit your speed. Not so much that you cannot solve these. Yes, you can, but it's the speed that matters so much at these competitions, and staying persistent and doing simulations. Now, having said that, for the reasoning skills, really, it's the time pressure and looking at explanations. But we offer these workshops, the practice questions, the coaching depends on what your specific needs are. I see from the corner of my eyes there was a question whether there's EU knowledge test in this particular competition. The answer is no. For specialist competitions, so far, and this seems to be the case still, no specific multiple choice quiz on EU knowledge. Certainly that's helpful indirectly, but it's not a requirement for this particular competition. And then with all the webinars and the different resources, I just want to highlight those, take a look at those. It's all on our site. If you prefer book format, I have my Ultimate EU test book. We have a 2025 edition, which recently came out. And again, if the EU knowledge for any reason is of interest to you, or perhaps you want to sit another competition where it's a requirement, we 6 months ago published the Ultimate EU handbook with my good friend Sonia, and that's in depth on EU history, institutions, and EU procedures. So there are a couple of other things coming up, written test simulations and the profile-specific packages and the field-related MCQ. I'll leave this here for a moment on screen while I try to answer a couple other questions. And here's one from Katrina about the internet connection. Does it need to be uninterrupted for the exam? Because you live in a region with poor internet. Now, the test which has been or had been the provider until very recently, they did not require continuous internet connection. That was a really big relief for most candidates, because if with yet a provider even before, that was even a continuous internet connection was required, and if something dropped, it was all hell breaking loose. So I do not expect that to be the case with the new test provider. And I think in industry standards, typically you download that app or that software, you take and there's a certain connection requirement at the beginning, then it stores in a secure way your answers, and then it sends in some way. I don't think that the internet connection needs to be continuous even with the new provider, but that's something that they're going to communicate. Booking a spot for exam at our office, how can you do that? You go to the Ambiorix Center webpage and you can book it there. If you don't have any free slot for your exam date, send us a message and we'll open it up. Dyslexia, if you are dyslexic, do you get special tests? That is something you may want to indicate to in your application, and they might provide some reasonable accommodation. They might require a certain certificate or other way to prove that it's not only just a claim that you're trying to get extra time or something, but really it's a condition you have. So indicate that and see if it gives grounds to a reasonable accommodation. And so another thing in terms of free resources, just to leave that on the screen, and like the Ask Me Anything seminar or webinars that we do, the jobs listing and articles. So I encourage you to sign up for those if you've not yet done so. And there's also community. So on Facebook, there is a group for EPSO building specialists. You can share news, rumors, information there with others if you are on Facebook. And I leave this on the screen, the discount code, which we're happy to offer a 15% that you stayed with us all the way so far. We appreciate that. And that is great. Though, again, even if you watch this as a recording, anyways, this is something we'll send you in a follow-up email. So it's not that you can immediately use the code, but you'll get the code in short order and you can apply. You can use that typically for all our digital products. Now, some other comments or questions here that come in. Do you know if the new interface will be made available by EPSO before the exam? Like I said before, it's hoping at this point, it's a hope rather than an expectation that they will make it available. Again, I don't expect a radically different interface, but certain minor or not so minor details need to be known. But they will tell you, can you use a calculator? What are the technical requirements? What exactly can you do? But I say more likely than not that we will have information about what the interface is going to look like. Mark versus pass. So is it important the mark in the written test, or we just have to pass it? So the written test, it's pass only. So it's not not ranked. So it's on a scale of 10 and you need to get 5 points. And once you do that, you pass. So it's not a ranked exercise. The only ranked exercise is the field-related multiple choice quiz. Test on the same day. Are tests done on the same day? Like I said earlier, so far, I can tell you what's been the case. Yes, everything was on the same day, but given the new provider and they might introduce certain changes in that regard, I can't say it with 100% certainty that everybody will have the test on the same day, or maybe everybody has on the same day, but not every component will happen on the same day. So maybe the abstract verbal numerical reasoning on a single day for all candidates, and the other components on another day. So again, this is something that they will communicate to you transparently and in advance so you can plan accordingly. Elena is asking, these 10, 12 weeks, how much time do you recommend to invest per week? We have a preparation planner. So it's a free tool on our site. My colleagues will tell me if it's currently being fine-tuned or it's fully valid and applicable. But there is a preparation planner on the site where you can input how much time you have available, which parts you consider to be the weakest, how much time you have available, most importantly, given your current circumstances, and it gives you a plan. It gives you an idea how much time and in what sequence. Okay. So we are working on updating it. So that should be coming back, I'd say, within 2 weeks, hopefully, perhaps even sooner. Dora is asking exam results, when we'll get the exam results, will we get the exam results even if we don't meet the eligibility requirements? Typically, they communicate to you the results. Say, this is how many points you got for this exam or that exam. So that is something they give you, even if you don't meet the eligibility. So they tell you what you got. They won't say for which question you got it right or got it wrong, but the overall score is typically something they will let you know. Okay, 1 or 2 questions before we close off in a minute. Reserve list. Are the evaluation selection of candidates for the reserve list only based on tests or also on our experience? So our experience is not factored in for the scoring. Your experience and diploma, work experience, all of that is a yes, no. Are you eligible? Do you qualify for this competition or not? And separately from that are the actual scores for the different components like I described, whether you pass the competition or not. Okay, and what happens if during the day for a test you fall sick or you have planned working trip? I don't think that you can retake it. At least in the past, this has not been the case. So if you don't take the exam at the designated time, then you no longer qualify. So that's unfortunate, but that's how it is. And again, I say that we'll see whether that policy changes or not, whether they give you any sort of flexibility there, but typically no. I guess for pure logistical reasons, they just cannot handle if somebody has a medical certificate or what have you. It's just not being granted so far. Okay, and final question, CBT, so the computer-based tests in different languages. Can you do this in different languages? For example, text in Greek, numerical abstract, or French? No. So there's language 1 in which you take the abstract verbal numerical all in the same language. For abstract reasoning, it's quite irrelevant because it's essentially the little charts and graphs. So their language doesn't really play a role. Obviously, for verbal reasoning, it plays a huge role, and even for numerical to some degree. But it's all in the same language. And then there's language 2, in which you take the written test and the field-related test. Okay, now I see there are a couple of other questions. I am sorry I don't have time now to answer those, but we'll try to find a way to answer those in a blog post or some other shape or form. But in respect of everyone's time and the 1 hour we allocated for this, I thank you so much for being here, for listening to the presentation. A huge thanks to Esther, to Rita, to everyone who made this presentation and everything else happen. And like I said, really working hard to see if we can provide those field-related multiple choice test questions. And I hope we get to it. But besides that, for all the other components, those are readily available on our website. So I wish you luck. I wish you dedication, determination to prepare for this. Take it seriously. There are a lot of candidates for sure. Certainly some profiles will be more popular than others. But once you set your mind to it and take it as an important decision in your life to pursue this, then put your best heart and mind into it. So with that, thank you so much for being here. If we can be helpful at EU training, let us know. We're here to help. We're here to guide you and point you to the best resources. So with that, have a nice day and hopefully see you around.